Board Game Brawl, and today we're taking a look at a card game that probably needs very little introduction if you're actually watching one of my videos, and that's Android Netrunner. Now, this is from Fantasy Flight Games and is originally designed by Richard Garfield. Now, a little bit of backstory is why I say originally designed. So, Netrunner, without the Android part, was a game designed by Richard Garfield back in the 90s. Richard Garfield is the original designer of Magic the Gathering and many other games since then, Robo Rally, King of Tokyo, and so on and so forth. But Magic the Gathering is definitely his calling card. And Netrunner was an attempt to have a collectible card game that was a little bit different thematically and gameplay-wise. But it didn't really go anywhere. I knew of its existence. I didn't really hear much about it. No one in my gaming circles back in the 90s was playing it. And it just sort of faded into obscurity. Well, Fantasy Flight Games had already had a series of living card games under their belt. They had the Call of Cthulhu card game, the Game of Thrones card game, Warhammer Invasion, and that might have been it at that point. And so they saw this Netrunner property, realized that the core mechanics of the game were very solid, and they had their... Fantasy Flight likes to make little universes within their games. They'd already had the Twilight Imperium universe, which they went ahead and re-implemented with the game Rex, which was a re-implement of Dune. They had already had the I forget what the name of it is, but Terranoth, I think, which is the universe setting for all their Rune games. Rune Wars, Rune Bounds, Descent, Runes something or other. I don't know, Rune Wars, I don't know if I already mentioned that, but so they like to do that type of thing, and they'd already had this Android universe with the Android board game, which was a very, very heavy and complex deduction game, which I didn't like very much. If I still had it, I'd review it and tell you why, because it was a very fascinating game, nevertheless. And it also had the game Infiltration, which was more of just a very light push-your-luck type game. So they decided to take that Android universe and slide it over the Netrunner card game with much improved artwork and design and a few little rules implementation tweaks. And this new implementation of it was just released last year, and it just hit the board game, card game world by storm. It came out in the summer. It might have come out at Gen Con 2012. Sold out there and has been selling like wildfire ever since. There's been tons of expansions and data packs. Basically, the kind of things they like to do with their living card games is release these packs. Unlike collectible card games, they're not random boosters. They're just sets and duplicates of the same like 20 cards that you can use to build up your deck. And it's become so popular that it is actually number 4 on Board Game Geek's ratings list. And that's not number 4 thematic game or number 4 card game or number 4 strategy game or whatever. It's number 4 of games, period. And whatever you think of BGG's rating systems, I have some problems with it too. That's tremendous. So why is this game so popular, and do I like it as much of the gaming world seems to? Well, why don't we go ahead and take a very brief look at it, because it's a very complex game, and then we're going to come back and I'll tell you what I think. So part of the reason that this game is difficult to teach and to explain is because the game is asymmetrical. Even though both players are working towards the same goal, how you get to that goal is almost completely different, whether you're playing the corporation or the runner. First off, let me mention that I've sleeved all the cards in this game, so if you see blue card backs, those are for the corporation. If you see red, that's for the runner. Now, how do you actually win this game? The person who gets to 7 agenda points first is the winner. Agendas are only going to be able to be gained from these cards. Now, these are agenda cards, and these are only in the corporation's deck. So the corporation is going to try to put these cards out and further them by advancing the agendas. They're going to try to put these little advancement tokens, which are the flip side of the credit chips, as many as this number up here in the corner, and if they can meet that number, they're going to be able to flip this card up, do whatever the ability says, and then score the agenda for that many points. Now, the runner ignores all that stuff, ignores advancing it, ignores anything in the text box. All the runner's trying to do is steal these cards. If the runner can successfully swipe one of these cards from the corporation, the runner will immediately score that card, and they're one step closer to victory. Now, before we get to all that and how that's actually going to go down, let's take a look at the factions that come in the box. So, For the runners, there's 3 different factions in the game of Netrunner. You have the Anarchs, who are sort of red, orangish colored. You have the Criminals, who are sort of blue colored. And you have the Shapers, who have the green color. And these are 3 distinct people with their own unique abilities. Further expansions will have different identity cards from different factions, and they'll all be unique. But they all have the same type of flavor. So the one we're going to focus on today is Mr. Noise here. And so he's an Anarch, and there's some important stuff here on the card. So this top number up here is their starting link power, which we'll explain a little bit later, and he has a 0 link. In fact, only one of the starting identity cards for the runner has a starting link, but then they have an identity. Then each runner has a different special ability. So for Noise, it's whenever you install a virus program, the corp trashes the top card of R&D. That all doesn't make sense right now, but it will in a moment. You also have this little card here, which is a handy tracker for keeping track of how many actions you have left on your turn, called clicks. You can do this any way that you want. They actually come with a little timer piece here to move it along. What I like to do instead is line up the number of clicks that I have and use these little trackers here and just flip them over to the opposite color for every one that I've used. It's just an easier way for me to keep track, but however you want to do it. Some people don't even bother with the card or the tracker, especially experienced players. And then you have a breakdown card of exactly what you can spend your clicks for. So, and again, this is an asymmetrical game, so what the corporation can do is different than what the runner can do with their clicks. So, the runner can spend a click to draw a card from the stack, which is your deck. There's a lot of different terminology in this game. They can spend a click to gain a credit. That's the symbol for a credit. They can spend a click to install a program, a piece of hardware, or a resource. We'll get all that soon. They can spend a click to play an event card. They can spend a click and 2 credits to remove a tag, because remember that this is all taking place in cyberspace and you're trying to hack into the corporation's mainframe, and they can put a tag on you to try and trace you. Or you can spend a click to make a run, which is pretty much the centerpiece of this game and the main action that the runner is going to want to take as often as possible. Making a run is trying to break into one server that the corporation has, trying to steal those agendas. So let's stay on the runner and explain exactly what the runner is going to be able to do. So first off, you're going to arrange all your stuff over here however you like, with your character card, cheat sheets, and your stack, which is your deck. And then you're going to draw 5 cards into your grip. And if you need to mulligan, you can mulligan once and only once. You have to keep what your second one is. You also are going to start with 5 credit chips, which are these right here, and these come in denominations of 5 as well. So basically, like I said, some of the things you can do on your turn, you can draw cards, you can play cards. Playing cards is the main way that you're going to be able to build up your stuff in order to make runs at the corporation and steal those agendas. And there's several different kinds of cards. So first off, you have probably the easiest ones to explain are the event cards. These are basically like one-time use cards that you will play, and like I said, you do have to spend a click of your valuable time. You have 4 clicks in a turn to play it. And in the top corner is going to be the credit cost. So infiltration here is 0 cost, and it's going to let you gain 2 credits or expose 1 card, because the corporation is going to have a lot of cards face down that you might want to see. And once you use an event card, it's just going to go into your discard pile, which has a funky name I don't remember right now, because everything in this game has a funky name. And some of these do different things. So for instance, Demolition Run is going to cost 2 credits, but it's going to immediately let you make a run on HQ or R&D, which would be the corporation's hand or deck, and give you some other abilities as well. So this is one of the really cool cards that's going to let you spend a click to use it, but then get another type of action that would normally cost you another click, so that's useful. And Sure Gamble here costs you 5 credits, but you're going to gain 9 credits, which could be handy if you really are in a pinch for money. So like I said, event cards go right to your discard pile. However, resources are a bit different. Resources are very helpful things that when you pay the cost and use them, they're actually going to go down in front of you, and you'll have your, you can lay it out however you want. People usually put their resources down closest to them at the table, and you can have as many resources as you can want and can pay for and play at any given time. So let's take a look at those. Armitage Code Busting is one that I'm particularly fond of. Basically, you're going to play it, put 12 credits from the bank on top of this card, and then in the future you can spend a click to take 2 from Armitage Code Busting, which is really good because normally you have to spend a click just to get 1 credit from the bank. This lets you get 2. However, once you've used them all up, this goes into the discard pile. And then you have the access to global sec, which is just going to give you 1 link. Now, link is very important because sometimes the corporation is going to try to trace you, in which case it's going to be opposed by your link strength. Their trace strength versus your link strength. And then something bad could happen depending on the card they're trying to hit you with if you don't have a high enough link strength. Wild side, I have mixed feelings about this card because it costs you 3 credits and it forces you, if it's in play, to auto spend a click every turn, but you draw 2 cards for having to do that. Much like the Armitage code busting, it's all about efficiency because now you can draw 2 cards for 1 click, and instead of drawing 1 card for 1 click, however, you are compulsed to do it. It is mandatory if that card's in play. So you can have as many resources as you want. That's not a problem. You'll just keep playing them out here like this. And now we're going to get to hardware. Hardware is another one that you can have as many as you want in play. This is basically you actually perfecting your computer rig and setup. They also have a credit cost as well, and they do different things. So the Grimoire here, it's going to give you +2 memory. That's what that symbol means. And memory has to do with programs, which I'll get to in a moment. And also, whenever you install a virus program, place 1 virus counter on that program, limit 1 console per player. Now, this is a console keyword. Now, it's important to note that with this deck, we're doing the Anarch deck for this set. They have to do a lot with viruses. So you're installing hardware here, and here's the Cyber Feeder. I like this one a lot too. Basically, this just gives you a floating credit every turn that you can only use for using icebreakers or for installing virus programs, which is really handy for this deck. And now programs, which are probably the most important card in any runner's deck. Programs are what you're going to use to actually make runs on your opponents, although they can do a myriad of different things. So Crypsis here is probably one of a very expensive program, but is all around kind of useful. It costs you 5 credits to put into play. Now these cards have another symbol up here, which is memory. You can only have a number of programs in play equal to your total memory. And you start off with 4 units of memory, I believe, if I remember correctly. But cards like the Grimoire that I showed you earlier can increase your memory and let you have more in play. So basically, this is the only kind of static card in play that you have a limit on. So I'm going to get into how you actually make runs and how runs are successful at the end of this video, because I pretty much have to show you both sides first. It's part of the reason why this game is so difficult. But I'll just break this down anyway. So you have your keywords here. He's considered a virus, so any effect like in this deck that affects viruses will affect him. And you can spend credits for icebreakers. This is an icebreaker program, which is what you're going to use to break ice, of course. And you can spend credits to do different things. You can spend 1 to break an ice subroutine, spend 1 to give Crypsis more strength. The strength is down here in the bottom corner. Right now he starts with 0. And you can place a virus counter on Crypsis. The reason why that's important is because every time that you make a run with Crypsis and you encounter ice, you have to remove a virus counter from him. If you can't remove one from him, he goes into the trash, which could be bad if you really need him. And you will install your programs up here just to keep them separate from the others. The Corroder is also an icebreaker. He can break barrier subroutines, which are a particular type of defense that ice have, and gets +1 strength, and he actually starts with 2 strength. Now here's an example of a different type of program. The Data Sucker is a credit to bring in and cost some memory, and he's also a virus, but he's not going to be used to actually make runs. Instead, whenever you do make a successful run on a central server, which is going to be your hand or the corporation's hand, the corporation's deck, or the corporation's discard pile, i.e. archives, you're going to be able to put a virus counter on Data Sucker, and you can then remove a virus counter from him to give a res piece of ice -1 strength. A res piece of ice is one that's been flipped up and paid for by the corporation. So that's mostly what you're going to do on your turn. You're going to be trying to draw cards. You're going to be trying to play out resources and hardware and programs, getting yourself ready for the main event of any runner, and that is the run. But let me show you what the corporation is going to be doing while you're doing all of this, and then we're going to get to the last part, which is how a run is going to be resolved. So, unlike the runners, the corporation actually has 4 different factions to choose from that are each very unique. So the one that we're going to be using for the example is Hasbioroid, and they have the special ability of their Megacore, and the first time you install a card each turn, you gain a credit, which is pretty damn good. Then you have Jinteki, NBN News Network, and the Wayland Consortium. Any similarities to any particular Ridley Scott movie that you may or may not have seen is purely coincidental. Now, as far as the other stuff that the corporation has just for basics, now you may notice that there is one less click on this card than for the runners. That's because you only have 3 clicks as the corporation, so you must use them wisely. But it is worth noting, and I'll say this again in a moment, that the corporation gets to auto draw a card every turn. So if you want to think of it as just them auto spending a click for that, you can do that. And here are the different actions you can spend those other 3 clicks on. You can draw a card from R&D, which is another word for your deck. You can gain a credit, that's just like the runner. You can install an agenda, asset, upgrade, or piece of ice. Those are somewhat similar to putting down hardware and resources, but can be played very, very differently. You can play an operation, which is a little bit like an event card. You can spend a click and a credit to advance a card. I mentioned that very briefly in the beginning when I was going over the how scoring agendas works, and that's basically putting one of these little tokens on any card that has the capability to be advanced, and it will say so. You can spend all 3 of your clicks to purge virus counters. Now, that's very significant because of the deck that it is going up against, because virus counters can be put on a lot of cards in that Anarch's runner deck, and that ability, spending all 3 clicks, gets rid of all of them. And finally, you can spend a click and 2 credits to trash a resource if the runner is tagged. So there's all kinds of other little tokens in this game. If the runner has one of these tags, at least one, then the corporation can take that action and trash one of their resources, which could be really, really significant. So, what are some of the cards in the corporation's deck, and how does that person actually take their turns? Okay, let's take a look at some of the cards in the corporation's deck. Now, let's get some of the terminology down straight right now, because it's very important for the corporation side. The corporation is all about servers. Remember that the theme of this game is that the runner is trying to hack into, make runs at all of the corporation's different servers to get those agendas. And each server here has a different name, and even if you don't want to use those names, it's very important for the cards that you know what each one means. So, the deck of the corporation is referred to as R&D, Research and Development. It always just says R&D. There will be a discard pile right next to the deck, and that is referred to as the archives. Now, the important thing about the archives is that many cards go into that pile face down. And the runner is not allowed to see what the face down cards are. Only the corporation can know what those cards are. But some cards will be placed face up if, for instance, it's an operation that the corporation has played and put it to the archives pile. Now, the character card, the corporation's basically faction card here, is going to represent HQ, which is in reality the player's hand. So, if a runner is, well, we'll get to that later, but basically HQ means hand. And then the corporation can have those are all central servers. The corporation can have even more servers called remote servers that he or she can lay out. But let's go over some of these cards first before we get too deep into that. So first you have operations, which you can spend clicks to play. They have a credit cost just like a lot of the runner's cards. And operations are basically one-time use things which will have special abilities. So for instance, Shipment from Mirrormorph here says that you can immediately install up to 3 cards, spending no other clicks, but having to pay all the install costs. You have Biotic Labor, costs 4 credits, and you basically gain 2 clicks. That's pretty cool. You have Archived Memories, which costs you nothing, and you can add a card from the archives to your HQ, which basically, essentially, in mechanical terms, you're taking a card from your discard pile and putting it into your hand. Now let's talk about assets. Now, assets are one of the cards that you can install. When you install a card, you're going to put it face down on the table. For assets, you're always going to do that on remote servers. So you'll put it down here, and you can have as many remote servers as you want, but each one begins a new server, essentially. And what assets can do, until they are the top number up in the corner here is their res cost. This is how many credits you have to pay in order to flip this card face up. And you see here we have this is the pad campaign. When this is res, you gain a credit when your turn begins. And you can, as a corporation, you can pretty much res cards whenever you want. As long as it's your turn or whenever it applies. It doesn't even have to be your turn. Pretty much whenever you can pay the cost and you want to flip the card face up and get their ability. This costs 0 to res, the Aggressive Secretary, but it's kind of a special card. This is sort of a trap for the runner. It can be advanced, which means you can put these little advancement tokens on it while it's face down. I'm sorry, like that. And while it's face down, if you pay 2 credits when the runner accesses Aggressive Secretary, which is to say that when the runner makes a run on a remote server with Aggressive Secretary and then gets to successfully and then gets to see it, you can spend 2 credits to trash a program for each advancement token on Aggressive Secretary. So like I said, that's a bit of a trap for the runner to try and trick them. You have another asset, which is, ooh, hunka burning love here. You got 4 credits to res this card, and you place 12. This is kind of like Armitage code busting, essentially. You place 12 credits from the bank on Adonis campaign when it's res. When there are no credits left on Adonis campaign, you trash it. You take 3 credits from Adonis campaign when your turn begins. Actually, I take it back. It's much better than Armitage code busting. Then you have upgrades. Now, upgrades are going to be played on servers as well, but when you res them, they become sort of permanent fixtures that make you better, essentially, if I said that right. So this costs Corporate Troubleshooter costs 0 to res. You can spend X credits, and you can choose a piece of res ice protecting this server. That ice has plus X strength until the end of turn. You'll have to trash that card as well. The experiential data here for 2 to res. All ice protecting the server has plus 1 strength. So like I said, you'll basically play an upgrade underneath whatever card or asset that you have here at the bottom of a tree. And now let's talk about the agendas. Now the agendas are the kind of the centerpiece of this game in the sense that this is what both players are struggling to get and acquire for their points. Now you'll install this the same way that you would install any kind of asset. You'll put it face down. It'll be the start of a remote server and so on. But the goal here is that you're never going to res this card. Instead, you're going to try to advance it. This is how many advancement tokens have to be on this card in order to score it. So you'll have to spend an action and a credit to advance a card. That's one of the things you can do with your clicks. And this is how many points it's worth if you can successfully advance it. And it also has a special ability that only applies to the corporation. If the runner steals this card, like I said, you ignore the cost up here and you ignore all this. But for the corporation and for Private Security Force, if the runner is tagged, Private Security Force gains 1 click, do 1 meat damage. So that's pretty nasty. Priority Requisition. It takes 5 to advance and you get 3 points for it. When you score Priority Requisition, you may res a piece of ice, ignoring all costs. That's pretty good. We haven't gotten to ice quite yet, though. And Accelerated Beta Test, when you score Accelerated Beta Test, you may look at the top 3 cards of R&D. If any of those cards are ice, you may install and res them, ignoring all costs. Trash the rest of the cards you looked at. That's really good. What's all this ice I keep talking about? So, ice are the cards that you're going to use to defend your servers. You can put ice, you can install ice, using your clicks, in front of any server you want. One of the central servers, in other words, your archives, your R&D, your HQ, in which case you just put it over here, or on any of your remote servers, and you're always going to do it like that. In other words, the runner is going to know that you installed a piece of ice here. They're not going to know anything else about it, but because it's turned sideways like this in front of something that's installed on a server, they're going to know that it's ice. Now, at any point that you want to pay the res cost, which is this cost up here, you can choose to flip this card up. Now, you're usually going to want to do that when the runner is making a run on one of your servers because, boom, that means that they have to deal with that piece of ice with one of their icebreakers. Now, if it's not resed, then it's pretty much dormant, it's turned off, however you want to say it, it's inactive, and the runner's going to get to go straight through unless you have some other type of trick up your sleeve. So you want to save credits to res ice whenever possible. Now, what are some of the numbers here? So this is the strength, and this is what the program that the runner is using is going to have to beat in order to get through to your server. But not only that, they're going to have to deal with all of these subroutines as well. So this is a particularly powerful ice. Probably shouldn't show you this one first, but the runner can actually spend clicks to break any subroutine on Heimdall here. And that could be very, very relevant because the things that Heimdall can do are nasty. Heimdall can do a brain, if they can't deal with the first subroutine, they're going to do a brain damage to the runner. The brain damage tokens are these here, and that's important because every brain damage token that the runner has, they have to trash a card from their hand, and their hand size is decreased by 1, from 5 down to 4, from 4 down to 3, and so on and so forth. And if the runner ever gets down to 0 cards in hand, they're dead. Their hand is essentially their life points in this game. And the 2 other subroutines are end the run, which means that the runner, no matter what happened before, has to stop their run action. So when the runner has to deal with these subroutines in order, one after the other, some way, somehow. And if you remember, a lot of icebreakers will let you ignore these subroutines if they're doing it right. Show you a couple other pieces of ice. Ichi 1.1 here, so 1.1 is much better. Res is for 5, has a strength of 4. And the runner can also spend clicks here to break any subroutine on Ichi. In this case, if you don't deal with their subroutines, it's trash a program, or trace. And the trace has to do with the link. You'll immediately make a trace attempt. And if their trace is higher, you have to give the runner 1 tag and do 1 brain damage. That's really, really bad, actually. And finally, we have the Roto turret here, which is 4 to res, has a strength of 0, but does have a couple subroutines, trash a program or end the run. So it's really cheap to bring out, and it could stop the runner, but it's also not all that powerful. So that is basically what the corporation can do. But we haven't talked about the most important thing in this game, and that is making a run. Let's very quickly and very simply break down what is involved in a run and how it works. Alright, this is a very simplistic look at how a run's going to go down. Let's assume that the runner is using Crypsis here. He's flush with cash over here. He's got nothing to lose. And he sees that the corporation doesn't have all that much cash. So let's make a run. So the runner has several options. So right now, the corporation has a central server set up. And a remote server. And as always, the corporation has their central servers, which is their HQ, which is their hands, their R&D, which is their deck, and their archives, which is their discard pile. Now, if Crypsis, from the runner, wants to make a run on the archive pile and is successful in that run, and remember, these pieces of ice can be in front of any of these servers, I'm just going to explain those last, then a successful run means that the runner gets to look through the entire discard pile. Now, remember what I said earlier. Some cards will be face up in the archives. Some cards will be face down. The runner can only ever look normally during the course of the game at the face-up ones, but on a successful run, the runner can look at all the cards in that player's discard pile. And, okay, this was a bad example of cards to put in here, but for every agenda that is in the corporation's discard pile, the runner steals them and immediately scores them. So the corporation needs to make sure that there are not any agendas in here at any given time, or at least not very many of them. But let's say that the runner knows that there's not any agendas, or has a pretty good idea that there's no agendas in the discard pile. So what they're going to do instead is try and go after R&D. When you're going after R&D, unless you have a special ability that says otherwise, you're just going to look at the top card of the deck. Okay, wow, okay, this runner's having a tremendously good string of luck, but if that top card is a agenda, the runner gets to swipe it and immediately score it. Now, there's something else special that the runner could possibly do if that's not an agenda. So, let's take a look at this card here. If that card had this little trash can, let me focus that in a little bit better. If this card had this little trash can down here in the corner, and the runner sees it during a run, they don't get the agenda that they want, but they have the option of spending whatever that number is in credits to trash this card and throw it into the corporation's discard pile, the archives. Now, it's really hard to get cards back from the archives without the use of another special card, so that could be very beneficial to get a good card away from the corporation. It's kind of a nice consolation prize if you don't get the agenda that you want. And the same holds true if you're trying to go for HQ, which is the player's hand. Now, how this is going to work, however, is that the corporation is going to have their hand of cards. Unless there's a special ability, the runner gets to look at one and only one of these cards on a successful run to the HQ. The runner will look at the card, and if it is an agenda, they'll immediately swipe it and score it. If it's a card that does have a trash cost, they can pay that cost and trash it. And that's how a successful run there works. Now, let's go ahead and say, however, that the runner has seen that the corporation has put out this card here. They don't know exactly what it is. It could be one of those trap asset cards. but they see that the corporation has taken the trouble to put 2 advancement tokens on it. It could be an agenda. Let's go for it. That's the only place agendas can be on a remote server, so it's got to be worth a shot, right? So Crypsis is going to try to rip through these 2 pieces of ice. Now, the corporation is going to pick up these cards without showing them and try to res them if possible. So the roto turret here has a res cost of 4, so boom. Corporation is going to pay that cost and res the roto turret. Now it has a strength of 0, but there's still 2 subroutines that need to be dealt with. Crypsis can spend credits to break ice subroutines of any type. So the runner's flush with cash. He's going to spend 2 credits, 1 for each subroutine. Boom, rips right through that piece of ice. The ice is still there. It doesn't really die. There has to be some sort of special ability that lets a runner destroy a piece of ice. In this case, there is not. Now he still has to deal with this piece of ice if the corporation reses it. Well, the corporation does not want this card to go away. So he's going to have to spend 5 credits necessary to res Heimdall, the ultimate piece, or I'm sorry, no, this is Ichi, the next ultimate piece of ice in this corporation's deck. Now, Ichi's a bit more troublesome. He has 4 strength, so unless Crypsis can meet or beat that strength, he can't even proceed forward to deal with the subroutines. So he's going to use Crypsis' ability to get more strength by spending 4 credits. So now Crypsis has to deal with those subroutines. And this one has a total of 3. So special ability here is that the runner can spend clicks. Well, to get rid of those, well, the runner has already spent all of his clicks, so you got to spend money. So again, Crypsis is going to use 3 more credits to ignore all 3 of those subroutines. No problem. Rip through all the pieces of ice. The corporation has no other card to play in response, no other ability, and voila, it's an agenda. So get rid of those advancement tokens. Doesn't matter to the runner. None of this stuff on the card matters to the runner. The runner swipes this agenda, gets more points, and hey, guess what? I like runners better than corporation. I'll just go ahead and say it right now. So let's say that the runner wins. Huzzah! So, like I said, that's a very simplistic view of how Netrunner works. You're going to try to score 7 agenda points before your opponent does. If you're the runner, you're going to try not to have a hand size of 0 because that's also instant death, and you're going to have a hand size of 0 by taking damage from net damage, meat damage, brain damage, and if you're the corporation, you're also going to lose if your deck runs out. I should mention that too. So, assuming no one else has met their lose condition, someone gets 7 points, they win. That's Netrunner. Try some deck building afterwards if you really like the game. Let's go back and I'll give you my final thoughts.
Okay, I know I'm not the greatest at doing overviews of games, but definitely, if you could tell anything from that overview, you can tell that it is a very complex game. There is a lot going on for just what is essentially a 2-player card game. And actually, that is one of my biggest problems, if not the biggest problem I have with this game. And that's that the learning curve is very, very steep. Even if you've got a few games under your belt, there's still little things that you are not really sure about. I think I pick up games pretty well, but unless you've played with every single faction a couple of times, there's just little things that you need to learn that it's just going to take with time and practice over and over again. And that's on both sides. Because this is an asymmetrical game where each side takes on a different type of role that's completely different rule set, completely different way that you're going to get to your objectives, you need to be playing both sides, all the factions, to really understand what's going on, and that makes this a very daunting game to teach to people. Whenever I have new people over, and let's say that we end up with 6 people near the end of the night, 4 people want to do a game that I really don't have an interest in, and I want to break off with another person and play a 2-player game, I would love for that game to be Netrunner because, spoiler alert, I really like this game a lot. But teaching this game is something I have a huge problem with. I don't think I'm alone. I think that it's a pretty difficult game to know all the ins and outs of because you have to teach both sides of the game. And it's almost like teaching 2 different games, 2 moderate games together that come together to form a complex game because of both sides. But having said that, like I said, I like this game a lot. I'm always looking for something. Maybe I have a chip on my shoulder about Magic because I felt so burned about it because Magic the Gathering was a really, really solid game. I'll always say that Magic the Gathering in and of itself is a solid game, but the implementation of it and trying to find people to play with who aren't super obnoxious and the
amount of strategy that you only really get from that game if you're willing to spend the money to get that game really bothered me. Whereas in Netrunner, I felt like I had a very unique, very strategic, very awesome experience right out of the core set box, which is what I looked at today. And I've never really felt the inclination to go and get more expansions for this game, even though it might be cool because the deck building aspect seems really fascinating here. But let's just talk about what comes in the box. So like I said, being an asymmetrical game, you have the corporation and you have the runner. My personal preference is the runner. The runner is a much more aggressive side. You need to be making runs almost every turn, especially early on before the corporation has a chance to get too many defenses out, because that's the only way you're going to win. On the runner side, it is all about push your luck, do whatever you can to get as much resources as quickly as possible, and run. And I really like that. It's very aggressive. It's the kind of decks I used to like to play in Magic, if I'm going to keep harping on that. And why not? These games were designed by the same person. But the corporation, even though I don't like them quite as much, is really, really fascinating because on their side, it's all about bluffing and misdirection. Especially depending on what factions you choose. Some corporation factions you choose, it can be very angled towards that, and some not as much. But putting down those cards face down, and the runner is just going in blind. You have no idea. And many a time I've fallen prey to the trap of, wow, there's 2 advancement tokens on that card. They must want to they must want to advance that. And then I make a run and boom, it's some sort of trap. Or making a run on their hands and they give me that smirk like, okay, and then I draw a card that's also a trap, and then I'm totally boned. And really interesting, really frustrating for the runner, but it definitely requires a lot more strategic thinking on the part of the corporation, I think. Not to say there's not strategy for the runner, but having to know how you should bluff the runner, what you're willing to sacrifice as far as dumping cards into your discard pile if you need to, your archives, but not knowing whether the runner is going to want to make a run on there anyways, thinking that you were bluffing him out. It's all very, very interesting. But let's go back to that for a minute. So the terminology in this game, leading into my discussion about the theme of this game, the terminology is definitely confusing at first. I've heard some other reviewers say that it's a bad thing in and of itself. I think that once you learn it, I think it's kind of cool because I think they definitely made effort, some very, very strong effort to implement a theme in this game. And I think that other card games like Magic don't do a theme very well. You can have the prettiest artwork that you want, but that doesn't mean that the theme is going to be any better. I've always thought of Magic as a more abstract game that never really dragged me into the theme, no matter how many new types of monsters and creatures they release. In Netrunner, by adding the terminology together with having the different setup and having the 2 different sides, I felt much more tied to the theme than I have than other card games. I'm not going to say it definitely made me feel like a hacker when I was a runner going through the corporation servers, but it definitely helped. It definitely made me feel like I was doing something significant, not just playing an abstract game of flipping over cards and hoping that the numbers that I have can beat that. Having that awesome artwork, which is really, really good in this game, and trying to and having these programs that thematically are all within like the internet, and they just look like the creatures that are on the cards, but they're all just technology and numbers and math. I don't know. I really liked it. I really think it came out pretty well. Making runs on different servers, having the remote servers and the central servers, the R&D, all that stuff I think works together really well, but it does add to the learning curve of this game, having to learn that terminology, which can be good and bad. Like I said, I kind of have a problem with the learning curve and trying to teach people this game. Overall, however, really, really cool game. Really, really cool. I wish I could play it more. 2-player games are notorious for getting to the table in my group, and I know there's variant rules for making this multiplayer. Without having played it, I don't know. This game was really meant for 2-player because this is one of those games where it's just you and your opponent, and you have to focus across that table. And if you're the runner, you have to make split-second decisions about where you're going to go. You got to do it. You have to get in there and just hope that you made the right decision. And if you're the corporation, you have to stay calm, you have to put your cards out, and you have to bluff, and get that runner to go where you need him or her to go. and that really only shines in 2-player. If I could play it more, I'm definitely going to get more of the expansion packs. They just came out with a really big expansion called Creation and Control that looks really interesting, adding different stuff to particular factions. It's a game I want to hit the table more, and does it earn its number 4 spot on BGG? I don't know about that, but I will tell you this. As of right now, it's probably my best collectible living card game. Of any of the games in that genre, this is probably one of the best I've ever played, probably my favorite right now, and I wish I could play it more. So, my name is Nick, this has been Board Game Brawl, reminding you to get out there and game every day, and in every day, every day and in every way, regardless of whether you're the runner or the corporation. Take care.